The trail was quiet that night, too quiet. The forest pressed close on either side, heavy with pine and fog, the kind of silence that makes you notice every shift in your own breath. My flashlight flickered, catching only the outlines of old wooden signs, half rotted and pointing nowhere. The dirt path beneath my boots felt soft, as if it hadn't been walked in years. I remember stopping just for a moment when I heard it, a voice, faint, almost too faint to be real. It sounded like my brother calling my name, but he wasn't there. He was miles away. The voice came again, closer, weaving through the trees with a strange echo. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to change. The trees twisted taller, the shadows stretched longer, and the air turned cold enough to sting. That's when I saw it, a figure standing in the middle of the path. Its shape not quite right, its movements too slow, too deliberate. I never should have kept walking. I never should have listened to the voice. Because once you step onto some trails, you're not meant to come back. The forest was quiet. Mist clung to the pines, soft and heavy. The smell of damp earth rose with every step. My boots sank slightly into the wet ground. I had started early, before the sun. The sky was pale, muted. Branches whispered in the wind, brushing my jacket. And then I heard it, a voice, soft, almost familiar. Alex. I stopped. Heart ticked faster than my steps. It sounded like my brother, or someone I once knew, but the wind carried no one. I froze. The fog thickened around the trunks, curling like fingers. A faint hum ran through the air, or maybe it was inside me. The voice called again. Alex, closer this time, as if leaning just behind the trees. I wanted to run, but my legs didn't obey. Branches scraped overhead. Leaves fell softly around my face. Each one sounded sharper than the last. I whispered back, unsure why. Who's there? Only silence answered. Yet the whisper returned. Still familiar. Still coaxing. Alex. I took a step. Then another. The fog pressed against my skin, cold and damp, and the smell of pine grew heavier. Something moved just beyond my vision. A shadow stretched between the trunks. I blinked. It was gone. My breath felt loud. Each exhale fogged the air, mingling with the mist. I realized I had no sense of how far I'd walked. The voice came again, quieter now, but I could feel it pressing around me, not behind the trees, but beneath my ribs, inside my chest. Alex. I shivered. The ground felt softer, mossy, like it wanted to swallow my feet. Twigs snapped somewhere far away, yet the forest stayed still. I want to call out, to say, stop, I'm here, but the words didn't leave me. My tongue felt heavy, as though the fog had settled in my mouth. Then I noticed it, a pale light flickering between the trees, a shimmer, not sunlight, something colder. I leaned forward. It felt like looking into a reflection I shouldn't exist in. The whisper grew, blending into the hum around me. It mimicked the laughter of someone I loved. And pain, a memory of a voice I hadn't heard in years, soft and twisted with the dark. I stepped closer to the light. Leaves brushed my arm like fingertips. I smelled smoke, though no fire burned, and my name, again softer, teasing. Alex. I tried to tell myself it was the wind, that I was imagining, yet I could feel breath on my neck. Slow, intentional. I turned. Nothing, just fog and the endless trunks. But every step back, the whisper followed, drifting between the trees, mocking, gentle, patient. I kept walking, trying to make sense of the sound, trying to tell my own ears, it's nothing. Yet the forest seemed alive, bending to keep me inside. The pale light flickered again, closer, not just ahead, but surrounding me. I pressed my hands against my jacket, heart thumping. The voice paused. Silence. And in that silence, I realized I wasn't alone. Not really. Something had been walking with me, just beyond sight, watching, waiting. I stopped. The fog wrapped tighter. The hum faded. The only sound was my own breath, quick, shallow. Then it whispered one last time, soft, unbroken, impossible to place. Alex. I ran. The trees swayed, branches clawing at my face. The earth sank beneath my boots. The fog swallowed me whole. Even now, I can feel it just at the edge of memory. Soft footsteps, rustling leaves, and a voice that sounds like home, but isn't. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, I hear it again, calling my name. The trail was empty. Late afternoon sun barely pierced the canopy. The air smelled of wet leaves and decay. My boots pressed into mud, leaving shallow impressions. At first, it was just me, alone. The wind stirred faintly, shifting dry branches overhead. Then I noticed it. Footsteps, soft, measured, exactly matching my own. I stopped. The echo stopped too. My chest tightened. A hum ran through the soles of my feet. I walked again, and again they followed. Every step aligned, perfectly timed, perfectly hollow. The path narrowed. Trees leaned closer, their shadows long and still. A pale light flickered through cracks in the branches. I could smell damp wood, and something older, something metallic. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was my imagination, but the steps kept pace. I paused, breath caught in my throat. The footsteps did not. They continued, soft, deliberate, echoing just behind. I could feel them pressing against the soles of my feet, tracing every movement. I turned slowly. Nothing. Branches hung low. Leaves trembled faintly. But no one was there. The trail twisted. Mud squelched beneath me, and the air grew colder. Each breath left a mist that merged with the creeping fog. The footsteps followed still, faint yet certain, echoing in rhythm with the earth beneath my shoes. I quickened my pace. They matched. I stopped abruptly. Still there, they lingered for a heartbeat longer. I could smell something foul now. Rotting leaves, maybe a body, or the memory of one. The trail felt longer than before, curved differently. I could feel the gaze of invisible eyes along the backs of my legs. The forest seemed alive. Branches scraped against one another. Shadows shifted along the trunks. Every so often, the fog would thicken, curling around my ankles like fingers. I whispered to myself. No reply, only the hollow steps. I tried walking in irregular patterns. Left, right, double steps. They adapted, always behind, always following, always mimicking me. A rustling came from the undergrowth, a soft exhale near my ear. I flinched, though no one moved. The path opened slightly, and pale light spilled through the trees. I could see the wet earth glistening. Every footprint I made seemed deeper, darker than normal. I stopped. The footsteps didn't. I held my breath, felt the fog settle into my lungs. Cold, damp, heavy. I turned slowly again. Nothing. Just shadows that did not belong to me. Just fog that lingered longer than air should. The trail curved once more. I walked, hesitant. The steps remained, echoing with a strange precision, a rhythm that was mine, and yet not mine. Time stretched. I could feel my heartbeat in the soles of my feet. The trail went on, endless, and the fog pressed closer with each step. Finally, I stopped completely. Silence. The footsteps lingered a second longer, then faded into nothing. The forest exhaled around me. The air was still. Leaves hung motionless. My breath clouded in front of me, trembled, then dissipated. I didn't move for a long while, listening, hoping, dreading. Eventually, I stepped forward. No sound followed, just a trail, empty and the memory of steps that had been mine, and yet never truly mine. The street was empty. Night had settled slowly. Streetlights cast pale circles over wet pavement. The smell of rain lingered, heavy and metallic. I walked alone. The air was still. Leaves clung to the sidewalk, dripping quietly. Then I saw her. At first, I thought it was my sister. The same height, same posture, same hair catching the lamplight. I could feel my chest tighten, breath catching in the chill. She smiled, and something in me froze. The smile didn't reach her eyes. They stayed blank, pale, distant. I took a cautious step closer. The air hummed faintly around me. My fingers brushed my coat, cold and damp from the drizzle. The figure tilted her head, as if studying me. I could smell faint perfume, but it was wrong, sharper, like chemicals. I whispered her name in my mind. It should have been comforting, But it wasn't. My name sounded strange in my own throat. The streetlight flickered. Shadows stretched long along the walls. I could feel the pavement vibrating softly beneath my shoes. And she didn't move, not really. I stepped closer. Every instinct screamed to run. But my feet felt heavy, pressed to the ground. Her eyes, they didn't follow me. They held a cold stillness, like the world beyond the street didn't exist. The smile remained fixed, plastic, rehearsed, misaligned with the emptiness in her gaze. I reached out. My hand trembled in the damp air. The rain misted my skin. The closer I got, the more distorted she became. The hairs on my arms rose. I could hear faint rustling, like static whispering in my ears. Each breath seemed louder than the last. I stopped, and she stepped closer. Or maybe I moved closer. Time fell uneven. The street around us faded. Fog drifted from the gutters, curling around our ankles. I could smell damp asphalt, and something else, something sweet, rotting beneath it. I wanted to speak. I wanted to call her name. But my voice caught, swallowed by the thick night air. She tilted her head again, the same way my sister used when confused. But her eyes, empty, pale, fixed, the smile remained. I backed away slowly. Her movements mirrored me, but always off. A fraction too late, a fraction too smooth. The hum in the air grew, low and persistent. The streetlights flickered again. Shadows wavered along the walls like living things. I turned a corner, expecting nothing, hoping she wouldn't follow. But the pavement was wet with my own footsteps, and hers just behind, always behind, perfectly aligned and yet wrong. I could feel the chill creeping up my spine. My coat clung to my shoulders. The air smelled of wet stone and something decayed. I paused in an alley. Silence pressed in from every side. The hum stopped. Only my breath remained, sharp and wet. I glanced back. She stood at the end of the street, still smiling, still wrong. I moved forward slowly. The alley swallowed me in shadow. I felt her gaze lingering. Even though I couldn't see her, the night stretched longer. Every step echoed in the empty street. I could feel her presence like a weight pressing from behind, a shadow I could not shake. Eventually, I reached my door. I closed it softly. The warmth inside met the chill clinging to my skin. And yet, even now when I close my eyes, I can see her, standing in the pale light, smiling, but her eyes never moving. Fog hung low between the pines. Early morning light struggled through the branches. The air smelled damp, sharp with moss and wet earth. My boots pressed into the soft ground, leaving fleeting marks. I was alone. The forest held its breath. Leaves rustled faintly, brushing against one another in quiet whispers. Then it came, a whistle, high-pitched, sharp, slicing through the mist. It seemed to bounce from tree to tree, circling me, taunting, deliberate. I froze. The air felt heavier. My pulse hummed in my ears. The smell of damp pine intensified, almost choking. It whistled again, this time lower, warped, echoing closer, yet distant. I could feel the vibration in my chest. I stepped forward. The whistle followed, changing pitch, moving around me, always just out of reach. The fog thickened. Shadows stretched along the trunks. A faint hum lingered, static and restless. My fingers brushed against wet bark, cold, rough. I whispered into the mist, my voice swallowed by the trees. Silence answered for a moment. Then the whistle returned, sharper, higher, like a blade through the quiet. It circled, weaving to fog, and I felt it tracing me. Every step measured, every breath mirrored. The path curved. Branches scraped overhead. Leaves clung to my coat, dripping cold droplets. The whistle shifted, low and hollow now, mocking, patient, endless. I stopped, held my breath. The fog pressed against my face, damp, cold. The whistle lingered, just behind the fog, then ahead, then around. I walked again. It followed, a predator's rhythm mirroring, teasing. I could smell wet soil and something else metallic, faint like old iron, like blood long forgotten. The forest seemed alive. Branches swayed though there was no wind. Shadows moved between the trunks. Every so often, A drop of water clung to a leaf and fell to the ground with a hollow tap. The whistle changed again. Longer, sharper, curling around the trees. I could feel it inside my skull, a vibration crawling to my ears and chest. I turned in a circle. The fog spun around me, thick and curling. No one was there, only the whistle, only the hum of the forest. I slowed and stopped. The whistle lingered, softened now, like a sigh drifting past my shoulder. My breath fog in the cold air. I could feel the ground beneath me, wet and yielding in the weight of being watched. I moved again. The whistle shifted, tracing my steps, never too close, never too far. The fog seemed to swallow the trail behind me, erasing everything but the memory of sound. Eventually, I reached the clearing. Pale light spilled through the mist, soft and still. The whistle had faded. Only silence remained. I stood there, heart hammering. The damp air clung to my skin. Branches rustled faintly in the distance. The forest exhaled around me, empty and patient. And though the whistle was gone, I could still feel it circling, just beyond sight, a memory of sound that would not leave me. The forest was quiet. Twilight lingered between the trees. Mist curled along the ground, damp and cold. The smell of pine and wet soil clung to my jacket. I walked slowly, alone. Leaves crunched softly beneath my boots, muted by the fog. Then I saw it, a glow ahead, warm, inviting, a circle of light promising rest. My chest eased. The chill receded just a little. The air smelled faintly of smoke and dry wood. I moved closer. The glow brightened with every step. Branches brushed my arms, wet and sharp. Rustling whispered through the trees. Figures sat around the light. I could see them, just silhouettes. Still, silent. Their shapes were human, but something felt wrong. The closer I came, the colder the glow. Not warm at all. It was pale, like candlelight through fog glass. It didn't touch the ground, didn't warm the air. I stopped. The figures didn't move. No shift, no breath, no blink. Just sitting. The mist curled around their legs, rising in slow, curling fingers. The smell changed, earthy, damp, but underneath, stale. Like something had been here long before me. I stepped forward again. The ground beneath me felt softer, almost spongy. The light flickered faintly, but it didn't dance. It didn't warm my skin. I could hear my own heartbeat. Every inhale seemed loud in the fog. The silhouettes remained still, their shapes exact, their forms too perfect to be real. I tried to tell myself it was a trick of the eyes, a reflection, maybe, of the fading sun. But the air felt heavier, pressing down around my shoulders. I crouched slightly to get a closer look. Branches scratched my face. Leaves dropped cold against my cheek. The figures were still, their shapes familiar. Faces just shadows. The glow shifted, or maybe I did. It was impossible to tell. And then I noticed it. No smoke rose. No warmth radiated. Not a single spark moved in the fire. The glow was hollow. The promise of comfort, empty. I could feel something in the mist. Soft watching. The hum of the forest was muted. Yet all around me, a subtle vibration lingered, like breath held just beyond my reach. I stepped back. Leaves pressed damp against my boots. The fog wrapped tighter. And still, the figures didn't move. Still, the fire remained cold. I could smell the wet earth and something else, something faintly coppery, like metal buried under soil. A memory I didn't want to remember. I turned slowly. The glow remained behind me. The silhouettes had not shifted. Not a breath. Not a blink. Not a hint of warmth. I left the clearing. The fog clung to me, soft and unyielding. The forest returned to quiet. Branches barely stirred. Leaves hung still, and the glow had stayed behind. Cold, hollow, and waiting. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see the circle of light. I can see the figures. Sitting, still, and the way the fire should have warmed me, and didn't. The trail was quiet. Evening had draped the forest in gray light. Mist curled along the roots and rocks. The air smelled of wet pine and cold earth. I walked slowly, alone. Leaves pressed damp against my boots with every step. A movement caught my eye. A deer, still, watching from the edge of the trail. Its coat glistened faintly in the pale light. The smell of wet fur mingled with the forest. I stopped, breath caught. The deer's eyes reflected the dim glow, unblinking. Then it shifted, slowly, rising onto its hind legs. The forest felt wrong. Branches overhead trembled. Shadows stretched long, crawling along the trunks. Its body grew taller, impossibly tall. I could feel the air thicken. The mist curled around my ankles, cold and heavy. A hum seemed to pulse faintly in my chest. I wanted to move, but my feet were rooted. The deer, or whatever it had become, loomed above the trail. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long, warping across the moss and leaves. It touched the trees, reaching further than physics should allow. I inhaled. The smell of wet fur was now mixed with something metallic, faint but undeniable. The forest around me held its breath. Rustling leaves fell softly, but no wind moved them. It shifted slightly, just a tilt ahead. The mist parted, revealing limbs that seemed too long. The trail beneath it bent with shadow, and my heart thumped in irregular, echoing beats. I blinked, and the figure stayed, motionless yet alive. The hum inside my chest grew. I could feel it vibrating through my bones. I stepped backward. Leaves pressed against my calves. The mist curled tighter around my legs. Its shadow followed, stretching longer than light allowed. I breathed. The sound seemed loud in the stillness. The deer remained, towering and silent. Its eyes, empty, reflective, held nothing but the forest and me. I wanted to turn and run, but something held me. A fascination, a terror I could not name. The trail felt thinner, narrower, as if it had been waiting for this moment. The forest hummed low, branches trembling as if whispering to each other. The deer shifted slightly again, just enough to remind me that it was real and wrong. The mist thickened around my face. I could smell the wet soil and something old, decayed, hidden beneath the forest floor. Finally, I stepped away. Soft footsteps pressed into damp leaves. The shadow lingered, stretching, until I turned a corner. I kept walking. Alone, the forest returned to quiet. The mist hung low, but the trail felt normal again. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see it, rising impossibly tall, its shadow stretching beyond the trees. Watching, waiting, the trail narrowed. Fog curled along the roots and rocks, soft and thick. The smell of damp earth and pine pressed into my nostrils. My boots sank slightly with each step, leaving faint impressions. I saw it then. A shelter, old but intact, with gray with age, shingles worn smooth. No hikers had been here for decades, and yet it stood, waiting. I stepped closer. Branches brushed my shoulders, cold and wet. The air hummed faintly, heavy and still. The door creaked when I pushed it. Inside, dust hung thick in pale light, which smelled dry and bitter. Silence pressed against me like a living thing. I noticed the walls first. Carvings, letters etched deep. Don't follow the voices. The words, sharp, deliberate, cutting through the still air. I ran my fingers along the grooves. Rough, splintered, cold. The shelter seemed smaller the longer I stayed. Shadows leaned into corners. A hum lingered faintly under my skin. I could feel in my chest, slow and steady. I stepped inside fully. The floor creaked beneath my boots. Leaves had blown in, dry and brittle. Each step seemed louder than the last, though no one else was here. The air smelled of old wood and something faintly metallic. A memory, maybe, of rain on iron or something long forgotten beneath the forest floor. I traced the walls with my eyes. The carvings repeated in places I hadn't noticed at first. Different hands, different time, but the warning was always the same. Don't follow the voices. A breeze moved through the open door. Cold, damp, rustling the dry leaves at my feet. For a moment, I thought I heard voices. Faint, just beyond comprehension. Then silence returned, thick and absolute. I moved toward the window. Pale light fell across the bench, illuminating the dust motes floating in the air. The forest outside was still. No movement. Yet, the hairs on my arms stood straight. I leaned closer to the wall. The carvings seemed deeper now, sharper, like they had been waiting for me to notice. I could feel a static in the air, like the forest itself was holding its breath. I took a step back. The shelter seemed colder, shadowed corners pressing closer. I could hear my own heartbeat, slow, irregular, matching the hum that had settled in my chest. The floor beneath me creaked again. Dust shifted under my boots. I could smell damp earth and faint decay, like something had lingered too long. I left the shelter slowly. The door swung softly behind me, but the silence remained. The carving stayed. The warning stayed. Outside, the fog curled around the trees. The trail stretched ahead, quiet and waiting. I could feel the forest watching, patient. And the words lingered in my mind, etched as deep as the ones on the wall. Don't follow the voices. Even now, I can hear them faintly in the distance, just beyond the trail. Soft calling, but always behind the warning. The path was dark. Night had settled deep in the forest. Fog curled low around the roots and rocks. The air smelled damp, earthy, and sharp with moss. I was alone. Each step pressed softly into wet leaves. Branches brushed my shoulders, cold and sticky with mist. Then it came. Laughter. Quiet at first, teasing. And then, exactly like mine. I froze. The fog thickened, curling around my boots. The air felt heavier, pressing against my chest. My own breath sounded loud in the stillness. I took a cautious step. The laughter followed. Every note mirrored mine, except it came from behind, deeper in the dark. The trees leaned closer. Shadows stretched long along the path. The fog swirled around me, wet, cold, insistent. I whispered to myself. My voice caught. The laughter, it matched every nuance, every inflection. It was mine, but not mine. I moved faster. Leaves and twigs pressed damp beneath my feet. The forest seemed to hum faintly, low and restless. The laughter curved around me, circling, patient, impossible to locate. A branch scraped my arm. Cold water dripped from leaves onto my neck. The fog smelled of wet pine and something older, metallic, distant, faint. I stopped, and it did not. The laughter lingered, spilling over each step I had taken. I could feel it pressing against the back of my skull, inside my chest, as if it had taken shape around me. The path twisted. Shadows flickered between trunks. Each time I turned, the laughter stayed behind, yet somehow close enough to brush my skin. I whispered again. Nothing returned except the echo of my own voice, twisted, doubled, mocking. The fog curled tighter, swirling around my boots, legs, waist. I tried to run, but each step matched by something unseen. The laughter shifted, higher, slower, always mimicking, always patient. The forest seemed alive. Branches trembled with static energy. Leaves fell silently, hanging in the damp air longer than they should. The path narrowed. I could feel shadows pressing closer, without shape, without form. I stopped again. The laughter paused, then resumed, softer, like a memory brushing against my ears. I could feel it tracing my movements, like a breath I could not escape. Finally, I stepped off the path. Mist curled around me, absorbing the echoes. The forest exhaled. Only silence remained. I could still hear it faintly, deep in the memory of the fog. A twisted, perfect echo of myself, laughing from behind. Always behind. Always mine. The path was narrow. Fog drifted low along the underbrush, soft and damp. The air smelled of wet leaves and pine needles. My boots pressed quietly into the mud, leaving fleeting impressions. I was alone. The forest felt heavy, almost listening. Branches rustled faintly, brushing against one another. Then I saw them. Eyes, dozens of them, glowing faintly from the shadows. Still, watching. They did not blink. I froze. The mist curled around my ankles, cold and soft. The air hummed faintly in my ears. My breath came quick, shallow. I stepped forward. The eyes followed, always aligned, perfect and patient. A weight pressed to my chest, like the fog itself was breathing down my neck. I shined my light toward them, and they vanished, just as suddenly as they appeared. The underbrush was empty, silent. The forest seemed to exhale. I took another step. They returned, glowing faintly, watching, unmoving, like memory given shape in shadow. The mist thickened. Leaves stuck to my coat, cold and wet. The forest hummed softly, a static undercurrent pressing beneath the fog. The eyes lingered, just beyond the beam of light. I could smell damp earth and something else metallic, old, faint. The path narrowed further. Shadows stretched along the trees, long and reaching. I tried to walk faster, but each step brought more eyes, always aligned with me, always patient. The forest seemed to press closer, each shadow a weight on my shoulders. I paused. The mist swirled around my legs. I could hear soft rustling, though no wind moved the leaves. I shined the light again. The eyes vanished. For a moment, the forest held still. Only my breath, loud and sharp, filling the silence. When I moved, they returned. Closer now, some peeking from under fallen branches, some hidden in the roots, low to the ground. Still, watching, I could feel them pressing against my skin, a suffocating presence. The mist curled tighter, wet and cold. Branches brushed my arms like fingertips. I stepped carefully, eyes moving with every step. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the mud. The air hummed faintly in my chest, a vibration that did not belong to me. Finally, I reached a small clearing. The eyes were gone. The underbrush empty, as if they had never been there. The fog hung low and still. I could still feel them, a memory of shapes and glow, watching from the darkness. Even now, in quiet moments, I feel them pressing from just beyond sight, waiting, patient and still. The forest was quiet. Mist curled low along the roots and rocks. The air smelled of damp pine and wet soil. Leaves pressed softly beneath my boots with each step. I was alone. Branches scraped lightly against my coat. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then I saw it. A cabin stood impossibly still, deep among the trees. No doors, no windows, no path leading to it, yet somehow it was there. I stepped closer. The fog wrapped around my legs, wet and cold. The hum of the forest grew faint in my chest, like the air itself had thickened. The walls were rough, dark wood. Knots and cracks glimmered in pale light. The silence pressed against me, dense and patient. I could feel it, something inside moving, a faint scratching, slow and deliberate, coming from somewhere deep within. I pressed my ear close. Cold air brushed my face. The scratching paused, then resumed soft, insistent, like nails tracing along hidden boards. I stepped around the cabin. The fog swirled at my ankles. Branches brushed my arms, dripping cold water. Every shadow seemed to twist closer, leaning toward the sound inside. I could smell the wood, dry and bitter, and something else faint, metallic, ancient. The forest around me felt alive, watching. I tried to listen. The scratching continued, sometimes soft, sometimes sharper, like it was moving in rhythm with my breath. I circled the cabin slowly. No doors, no windows, just walls, dark and smooth. The fog wrapped tighter, curling against my legs, my coat, my skin. A bird moved somewhere above. Its wings brushed the air like a whisper. The scratching paused. The forest waited. I pressed closer to the wall. Cold wood beneath my hands. The sound was faint now, but it had a pulse, a rhythm that felt alive. I whispered, almost without realizing it. The air swallowed the words. The scratching hesitated, and then resumed, patient, hollow, constant. I stepped back slowly. The fog shifted with me. The forest exhaled softly, leaves rustling faintly like a breath. I could feel the cabin's presence, dense and silent, watching, even without doors or windows. It seemed to know I was there. Eventually I left. The fog curled around my ankles as I walked. Branches pressed softly against my coat. The forest seemed still again, and yet even now I can feel it. The cabin deep among the trees, silent, watching, scratching faintly in the dark, waiting for someone else to come close. The trail was quiet. Morning fog curled along the roots and rocks, cold and damp. The smell of wet pine and moss pressed into my nose. Leaves clung to my boots with each step. I was alone. Branches scraped against my jacket. The forest seemed to lean closer, listening. I came across a fallen log, moss-covered, gray with age. A trail marker leaned against it, faded and cracked. I stepped over the log. The The forest whispered softly around me. Rustling leaves pressed against my legs. The path curved, and then I saw it again. The same fallen log, the same trail marker, exactly the same. A shiver ran down my spine. The fog thickened, curling around my ankles. The forest pressed close, heavy and silent. My breath sounded loud in the mist. I moved on. The trail twisted, familiar and wrong. And again the log appeared. The marker leaned in the same angle, moss still clinging. I stopped. The forest seemed darker now. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. The air smelled damp, but faintly metallic too. I walked faster. Soft footsteps pressed against wet leaves. Branches scraped at my arms. The log appeared once more, then the marker, then the same twisted pattern of moss and decay. I could feel it watching. The hum of the forest pressed into my chest. Each loop made the shadows longer, stretching along the trail like fingers. I tried to step off the path. The ground pressed damp and soft beneath my boots. But the forest seemed to shift with me. The same log appeared, leaning as though it had waited. I whispered to myself. The mist swallowed my words. Silence answered, then the forest pressed heavier. Shadows pooled deeper, trees leaning closer, as if the forest had grown impatient. I circled again. The fallen log, the marker, the moss clung to it, unchanged. The air felt older, thicker, like time had slowed, and the forest had been waiting. I could hear my own heartbeat, irregular, pressing in my ears. The fog curled higher, wrapping my legs, waist, chest. Every step seemed measured, every breath mirrored by the forest. I stopped. The forest exhaled softly. Leaves rustled faintly. I could smell the wet earth and the faint iron scent beneath it. The log appeared once more. And then it hit me. I was walking in circles. Each loop tighter, darker, the forest watching, patient. I stepped off the path. Soft earth pressed damp beneath my boots. Mist curled around me. Branches reached closer, brushing my arms. The forest held its breath. Finally, I found a clearing. The log and marker were gone. The fog hung low and still. The forest seemed quieter, waiting. But the memory stayed. Of the loops, the same log, the trail marker, and the way the forest had leaned in, watching, patient, as if it had always known I would come back. The forest was quiet. Fog curled along the roots and rocks. The air smelled of damp pine and cold earth. Leaves pressed softly beneath my boots. I was alone. Branches brushed my arms. The forest felt thick, like it was holding its breath. Then I heard it. A call. Sharp, low, deliberate. It broke the silence and lingered in the mist. I looked up. A crow hovered above the trail, wings slow and steady. Its feathers glistened faintly with wet fog. The smell of rain on wood and soil clung to the air. I whispered a word, softly, almost without thinking. The crow cawed again, and it repeated the word. Not quite human, not quite bird, but it mirrored the sound of my voice. Fragments of sentences I had spoken moments before echoed in the crow's call. I stopped walking. The mist swirled at my ankles, curling cold. Branches trembled faintly overhead. The crow circled closer, keeping pace, its voice bending my words into something strange. I tried to move faster. Soft steps pressed into wet leaves. The forest hummed faintly in my chest. The crow repeated fragments of my speech, slightly distorted, sharper, unnatural. Its shadow stretched along the trail, a long, black line in the fog. Every flap of its wings pressed cold air against my face. The metallic scent of wet feathers hung faintly in my nose. I whispered again, a full sentence, cautious, reflective. The crow cawed back, twisting my words into something alien. The voice above was not human, not mine. Something else inhabited it. I stopped again. The forest felt patient, waiting. The fog wrapped higher around my waist, coiling softly like a living thing. The leaves pressed against my boots, heavy and damp. I tilted my head. The crow's eyes glimmered faintly, intelligent, attentive. Its wings barely moved. The rhythm of its voice matched my breathing. Every inhale mirrored, warped, echoed. I could feel it pressing closer, though the air remained still. The crow hovered silently now, watching me through the mist. The fragments of my own voice hovered in the fog, sharp and unnatural, as though the forest itself had learned to speak. I stepped off the trail. Mist curled around my legs. Branches brushed my coat. The crow followed, quiet now, perching somewhere just beyond sight. Its eyes glimmered in memory, watching, patient. Finally, I stopped. The fog pressed soft against my face. The forest exhaled. Leaves rustled faintly. And the crow, it remained somewhere above, its presence echoing in the fragments of my own voice. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can hear it, soft, distorted, twisting my words just beyond the treetops. Patient, watching, and waiting for me to speak again. The trail was quiet. Fog curled low along roots and rocks. The air smelled damp and cold, heavy with moss. Leaves pressed soft beneath my boots. I was alone. Branches brushed my arms. The forest seemed to lean closer, patient and still. Then I saw it, a shadow, human-shaped, lingered just ahead on the trail. Still, silent, I stepped closer. The fog pressed against my ankles, curling cold. The forest hummed faintly in my chest. The shadow did not move. I could feel it, watching. Its shape was solid, yet somehow wrong. The air smelled faintly metallic, like wet iron. My breath came quick, shallow. I moved again. Soft footsteps pressed into damp leaves. The shadow tilted its head, slowly, deliberately. No other motion, just a tilt, curious and patient. The trees leaned closer. Fog wrapped around my waist, my chest, my arms. The forest exhaled softly. Branches rustled faintly, brushing my coat. I whispered to myself. The shadow remained, tilting, always tilting, as if it understood my every word. The air felt thicker, heavier. I tried to step off the trail. The forest seemed to shift with me. Shadows stretched long beneath the trees. The fog clung to the ground, curling around my boots. The shadow waited. I could hear my own heartbeat, loud in the stillness. The forest pressed close, patient. Every step brought me nearer, but the shadow did not flee. It only tilted its head, observing. I tilted mine in return. The fog swirled around my legs. Leaves stuck to my coat, cold and wet. The air hummed faintly, a vibration that pressed into my chest. I moved closer still. The shadow remained frozen, its tilt the only sign of thought. The mist hung heavy, cold against my skin. The forest smelled of damp earth and old wood, faintly metallic, lingering. I stopped. The shadow did too, though it had never moved. Silence pressed, thick and patient. Branches trembled faintly in the fog. Leaves rustled at my boots, but no wind moved them. I could feel it pressing closer, though the space between us remained the same. The forest exhaled softly. The shadow tilted again. Slow, curious, endless. I stepped back. Fog curled around my ankles. The forest waited. The shadow lingered, patient and still, tilting its head as I moved away. Even now I can feel it, frozen there on the trail, waiting, tilting, watching. The forest was quiet. Mist clung to the branches, wet and heavy. The air smelled of damp earth and pine. Soft leaves pressed under my boots with each step. I was alone. Branches brushed my arms, cold and damp. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then I saw it, a campsite. Tent stood open, flaps trembling lightly in the fog. Supplies were scattered, bags, cooking gear, a few forgotten bottles. But no campers remained. I stepped closer. The damp air pressed against my skin. Every breath felt sharp, too loud in the stillness. The forest hummed faintly, patient. I approached the tent. A sleeping bag lay torn open from the inside. Fabric shredded, twisted, and wet. Nothing inside, nothing at all. I looked around. Every tent, the same. Sleeping bags ripped. Supplies left as though hurriedly abandoned. The fog wrapped tight around the camp, curling at my ankles. Branches scraped lightly against my coat. I could smell damp canvas and something faintly metallic, like old iron. The silence pressed closer. No birds called. No wind stirred the leaves. Only the soft hum of the forest, patient and still. I stepped into the center of the campsite. Footprints pressed into the mud. They led in circles, sometimes stopping abruptly. The The fog clung to the ground, curling around my boots. I whispered, softly, almost afraid to make sound. The tents trembled lightly. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. The forest felt like it was watching. I touched a torn sleeping bag. Cold, wet, and sticky. A faint rustle from another tent made me jump. But no one was there. Nothing moved but the mist. The scattered supplies lay undisturbed. A plate tipped. A cup cracked. Everything suggested a sudden departure, and yet the bags torn from the inside spoke of something unseen, patient, deliberate. I stepped back, heart pressing in my chest. The forest seemed to hum louder now, filling the space between tents. Branches reached toward me. The fog thickened, curling at my waist. I moved to leave. The campsite stretched around me, empty yet full of memory. Shadows pooled, pressing against the edges of vision. The tents flapped softly in the mist as though breathing. I took one last look. The sleeping bags, shredded and still. The forest silent. The fog curled tight around the ground. And I could feel it, the emptiness, patient, watching, and waiting for someone else to arrive. The trail was quiet. Fog pressed low along the roots and rocks. The air smelled of wet pine and cold earth. Leaves clung to my boots with each step. I was alone. Branches brushed my arms, damp and cold. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then I heard it, leaves rustling, soft, deliberate. Behind me, I paused. The wind had died completely. No breeze stirred the branches. No birds called. And yet the rustling continued, a step behind each of mine, matching my pace too closely. I walked faster. The fog swirled at my ankles, cold and wet. Branches scraped against my coat. The rustling followed, relentless. Even when I stopped, it lingered. I whispered, softly. The forest swallowed my words. The rustling pressed closer, folding around the silence, patient and deliberate. I turned my head. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. No movement, only the sound of leaves pressing against each other. The air smelled damp, metallic faintly, like old iron. I stepped forward again. Footsteps pressed soft into wet leaves. Branches trembled overhead. The rustling followed, always a little behind, as though the forest had learned my rhythm. I tried to listen. The sound moved, curling around my legs, pressing into my chest, a pulse I couldn't place. The forest felt alive, patient and watching. I stopped. The rustling paused for a heartbeat. Then it continued, soft, persistent, a few steps behind, and somehow closer than before. I moved off the trail. Mist curled around my ankles. Branches pressed against my coat. The rustling followed, weaving through the fog, never still, never gone. I breathed slowly. The forest seemed to stretch and lean in. The rustling pressed to my chest, a living presence, patient and calm, yet impossible to ignore. I stepped into a clearing. The fog hung low and heavy. The rustling slowed. The forest exhaled. The leaves settled softly. And yet, even now, I can hear it. Soft, deliberate, folding through the trees behind me. Waiting, always a step behind. The night was still. Fog clung to the valley, curling over rocks and roots. The air smelled of cold earth and damp pine. Leaves pressed softly beneath my boots. I was alone. Branches brushed against my arms. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then I saw it, a figure, far across the ridge, unmoving, glowing faintly under the pale moonlight. I paused. The fog pressed low around my ankles. Branches trembled faintly in the breeze. The air felt heavier, colder, like it was holding something in. I took a step forward. The figure remained still, silent. The pale glow made shadows stretch long across the rocks. The forest hummed faintly in my chest. I kept walking. Each step pressed soft into damp leaves. The fog swirled at my ankles. The ridge felt farther away and closer at the same time. Hours passed. I stopped, uncertain. The figure, it was closer, not moving fast, but closer. The night pressed around me. The air smelled faintly metallic, like rain on iron. Branches scraped against my coat. The forest seemed to lean in, patient and silent. I whispered softly, barely breathing. The figure did not respond. It only stood, glowing pale, tilting slightly in the moonlight. its presence pressed into my chest, cold and patient. I tried to move faster. Leaves rustled underfoot. The fog curled tighter around my legs. The ridge stretched ahead. The figure remained closer, its glow faint but undeniable. I stopped again. The forest exhaled softly. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. The ridge seemed to stretch on endlessly, and the figure stood, waiting silent, closer now than it had been hours ago. I tilted my head, feeling the cold press into my face. The air smelled of damp wood and wet stone. The forest was patient. The figure was patient. I stepped off the path. The fog wrapped around my boots, curling at my ankles. Branches brushed my coat. The glow of the figure faded and brightened in the mist. It waited unmoving, yet drawing near with time. I breathed slowly. The forest held me in its quiet. The ridge, the figure, the fog, all pressed together in stillness and cold. And though I turned to leave, I could feel it watching, waiting closer now, patient and unhurried. Even now, when the forest is still and silent, I can see the pale glow on the ridge, alone, unmoving, and somehow closer than it should be. The valley was quiet. Mist rolled low along the pines. The air smelled of damp earth and cold stone. Leaves pressed soft beneath my boots. I was alone. Branches brushed against my coat. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then I heard it, a low howl. It rolled across the valley, echoing softly. At first, it was distant, ordinary, like a wolf somewhere far off. But it warped, twisted, almost human, a hollow timbre that pressed against my chest. I froze. Fog curled around my ankles. The air felt sharp, metallic faintly. Branches scraped lightly above. The forest exhaled softly, patient. It came closer, step by step, inch by inch. The howl shifted, bending in tone, stretching like the air itself was alive. I whispered to myself. The sound pressed against me, soft and deliberate. No rustle of movement, no snap of twigs, just a howl drawing nearer. The valley seemed smaller. Shadows pooled beneath the trees. The fog thickened, curling against my boots. The howl pressed against the silence, patient, waiting, watching. I stepped forward. Leaves pressed soft beneath my feet. The howl responded, bending again, the sound a rhythm, a heartbeat I could not place. I stopped. The echo of it filled the valley. I could feel the cold press into my chest. Branches trembled faintly in the mist. The howl was closer now, closer than it should be. I tilted my head. The sound was almost to where, faintly human, and yet not. It circled softly, patient, deliberate. The forest pressed around me, holding its breath. I moved again. Soft footsteps pressed into damp leaves. The howl followed, wrapping around the fog, folding into every shadow. I breathed slowly. The forest seemed alive with waiting. The howl came nearer still, its warped voice stretching and bending, a presence, patient and silent, pressing into the mist around me. I stepped off the path. Fog curled at my ankles. Branches brushed my arms. The howl slowed, then paused, as if listening. I held my breath. The forest exhaled softly. The valley waited. The howl lingered, patient, close enough that I could feel its rhythm in my chest. Almost human, almost impossible. Even now, I can hear in the quiet, a low warp howl, step by step, drawing near, patient, waiting. The trail was quiet. Mist hung heavy over the roots and rocks. The air smelled of damp pine and wet earth. Leaves pressed softly beneath my boots. I was alone. Branches brushed against my coat. The forest seemed to hold its breath. At the edge of the path, a wooden post appeared, a map nailed crudely, swaying in the pale light. I stepped closer. The map shifted. Paths I didn't remember, twisting and folding across the paper. Warnings scrawled in uneven letters. I leaned in, breath misting in the cold air. I looked away for a moment. When I looked back, the map had changed. New trails, new markings. The forest behind me felt thicker, heavier. I traced the path with my finger. It vanished under my touch. Another appeared in its place. The warning seemed sharper now, urgent. I could hear the rustle of leaves behind me, soft and patient. I stepped back. The air smelled metallic, like wet stone. The The fog curled at my ankles, pulling at my boots. The map shifted again, paths folding and unfolding, letters twisting into shapes I could almost read. Hours, or maybe minutes, passed. I couldn't tell. The map always changed when I blinked. The forest seemed to lean in, waiting. I whispered softly, words half-breathed into the cold. The map twisted again. This time, the last line stared at me clearly. Turn back! I froze. Branches pressed against my coat. The fog pressed against my boots. The forest exhaled softly, patient, waiting. I stepped closer. The paper felt damp under my fingers. The words seemed to pulse. Alive? Paths folded impossibly, leading nowhere, or maybe everywhere. I looked away. The forest stretched endlessly, in every direction. The map shifted again. It didn't matter where I looked. The words always returned. Turn back. I tried to step forward. The fog pressed against my legs, curling around ankles. Leaves rustled softly, but no wind moved them. The forest seemed to hum faintly in my chest. I whispered again. The words seemed to echo in my mind. Turn back. The map pulsed under my fingertips. I felt the cold press into my chest, the forest holding me in silence. I stepped away from the post. The map shifted one last time. Blank paths, empty warnings. The words vanished. And yet, in the quiet, I could still hear them. Soft, insistent. Turn back. The trail stretched ahead. The fog pressed low. The forest waited. And the map, forgotten by time, was never really gone. The trail wound through thick fog. Branches pressed close. Needles damp with dew. The air smelled of wet earth and pine. Soft leaves crunched under my boots. I was alone, or so I thought. The forest hummed faintly, patient, still. Ahead, movement. Shadows slipped between the trees. Figures, walking the trail. Human shapes, tall and straight. But they made no sound. Not a footfall, not a breath. The forest held them as if it swallowed all noise. I stepped forward. Leaves pressed soft beneath my boots. The figures kept pace. Calm, measured, deliberate. Their silence pressed against me. The fog thickened, curling at my ankles. The air felt colder here. The shadows pulled beneath their feet, stretching unnaturally across the trail. I blinked. They were closer now, still silent. Their movements human, but wrong. Too smooth, too patient. I whispered, softly, a sound swallowed immediately by the fog. No response, no acknowledgement, just the stillness of their shapes, moving without noise, a quiet that pressed against my chest. I tried to step aside. The forest smelled damp and hollow. Mist clung to my arms and boots. The figures mirrored my path, just far enough ahead to remain untouchable. I froze. The silence wrapped around me. Branches creaked faintly, but the figures moved without disturbing the air. No rustle of clothes, no sound of feet. The trail narrowed. The fog thickened. The forest leaned closer, as if waiting for me to move. The figures glided forward, and the world grew colder with each step. I tried to breathe slowly. The chill pressed against my chest. Every shadow seemed to wear. The silence deepened, thicker than fog, heavier than the damp earth. I blinked again. They were still ahead, moving forward, yet not moving. A dreadful stillness that followed, patient, almost alive, as if the forest itself had shaped them. I stepped back. Leaves pressed soft beneath my boots. The figures did not pause. Not a single sound, not a single glance. Just patient, silent motion, waiting, watching. I wanted to turn, to leave the trail, but the silence pressed into my ears, into my chest, into the spaces between each step. I could feel it hum faintly, a cold, patient wait. And then they vanished. Or maybe I had blinked. The trail was empty. Only fog and shadows remained. I could still feel them. In the quiet, in the hum of the forest. Watching. Patient. The forest was quiet. Mist clung to the ground, curling around roots and fallen branches. The air smelled faintly of wet wood and smoke. I could hear my breath, soft and uneven, as I walked. The trail narrowed, twisted by moss-covered stones. Leaves pressed damp beneath my boots. The wind whispered through the pines, but the air felt heavier here, still somehow alive. Ahead, a glow. Soft, pale light swinging gently from a branch. An oil lantern, suspended, moving in a rhythm too steady for the wind. No one was near. I stepped closer. The flame flickered, yet never dimmed. The warmth barely touched the chill pressing against my skin. Its light cast long shadows across the fog, shadows that stretched and twisted like slow fingers. I reached out, fingers brushing the air near it. The lantern swung, but the rope was steady, as if guided by an invisible hand. I could hear nothing but the faint hum of the forest, and my own heart beat slow and loud. The flame reflected in the wet leaves. I could see myself, pale and still, staring back. The lantern swung gently, teasing the shadows into motion, casting fleeting shapes that vanished when I blinked. I stepped closer, boots pressing into soft mud. The smell of smoke was faint, almost metallic. The lantern's flame seemed to watch me, casting a glow that was warm but hollow, like a memory I couldn't place. I whispered, barely audible. The words hung in the fog. The lantern swung again, unchanged. The flame never wavered, even as the wind picked up, stirring the branches around me. I circled it slowly, keeping my distance. The shadows shifted, lengthening, touching the ground like soft fingers, then retreating, as if afraid of their own shapes. The forest held its breath. Every rustle, every snap of a twig, sounded impossibly loud in the hush. The lantern hung there, swinging, its flame a steady, silent pulse in the mist. I thought about leaving, but something held me, a quiet curiosity wrapped in unease. The air smelled damp and faintly of oil, and I could feel the weight of the silence pressing down. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell. The lantern stayed, unwavering. Its light seemed to pulse softly, and I realized it was not just swinging, it was waiting. I stepped back slowly. The fog curled at my boots, brushing my ankles, branches pressed close. The forest hummed faintly, and the lantern swung gently, a beacon in the cold dark. I didn't move too quickly. I didn't breathe too loudly. The light was steady, patient, watching, holding the space between the world and the shadow. Eventually I turned. The trail swallowed me again, fog curling around my legs. But the glow remained, swinging silently, as though the lantern itself had chosen to stay, and I would always remember its quiet, unwavering flame. The morning fog hung thick over the trail. Damp air pressed against my face, carrying the scent of wet bark and earth. My boots sank slightly into the soft moss, and I could hear the faint hum of the forest around me. Trees leaned close, branches tangled overhead. Something made the air feel heavier, as though the forest was holding its breath. I noticed the first tree. Its bark was carved, not random scratches, but spirals and runes. The grooves were deep, darkened by moisture, and the edges shimmered slightly in the pale light. I leaned closer, trying to see the shapes clearly. They seemed to move when I stared. A spiral would twist, or a rune would elongate, like the wood itself was breathing beneath my gaze. I stepped back, uneasy. The next tree bore the same marks, and then the next. The forest was covered in them, a pattern that felt deliberate, ancient, and unreadable. The air smelled faintly of smoke, though no fire had burned here. The moss was damp beneath my fingers as I traced a line. Cold, sticky. The carving seemed almost to pulse beneath my touch, as if alive. A breeze rustled through the canopy. It carried a faint static hum, and the runes shivered in the dim light. I realized the carvings weren't just shapes. They were warnings, or invitations, and I couldn't tell which. I moved slowly, circling a large tree. The spirals shifted again. A line I had thought straight curved suddenly, and a rune I recognized as one symbol blinked into something unfamiliar. The forest seemed to twist around the carvings, pulling my gaze back to them over and over. I felt my heart tighten. The trail beneath me grew narrower. Shadows pressed at the edges of my vision, thin and restless, like smoke from a hidden fire. I could hear the faint snap of branches, but no wind stirred them. I tried to shake the feeling, to step forward, but my eyes kept returning to the bark. The symbols whispered silently. Every spiral, every rune, seemed aware of me, aware of the way I moved and breathed. I bent down, brushing moss aside to see the base of one tree. Carvings ran into the roots, curling into the soil itself. I smelled damp earth, metallic and sharp, and a chill crept up my spine. I realized the patterns were everywhere, and the further I went, the more the forest seemed alive with them. I took a cautious step back. The carvings shifted again, subtly this time. The lines elongated, stretched toward me, and I felt the first prickle of true fear. The forest wasn't just watching, it was waiting. The trail twisted under my feet. Each tree I passed bore new spirals, shapes that seemed to respond to my presence. I tried to look away, but the eyes in the wood were there, in every curve, every notch. I reached the edge of a clearing. The sunlight was pale, muted by fog. A single tree stood alone, its trunk wider than the rest. The carvings on it were dense, overlapping, lines and runes I could no longer name. They seemed to pulse faintly, as if breathing in time with my own heartbeat. I took a slow step back. The forest seemed to exhale with me. I felt the dirt and moss beneath my hands, the smell of bark and cold earth filling my senses. The carvings remained, shifting, watching silently. I turned and walked. Each step felt heavier than the last. The spirals and runes blurred in my mind, shapes that might have been warnings or something worse. The forest hummed softly around me, and I realized the carvings would always be there, moving, shifting, waiting in the silence. The forest was quiet. A thick fog clung to the undergrowth, coating the leaves in damp silver. The air smelled of earth and decay, and my boots pressed softly into wet soil. I noticed the first bone half buried in the dirt, small, pale, brittle. It looked like it had been there for years, yet the edges gleamed faintly in the muted light. I stepped closer. There were more, scattered across the path in no obvious order, yet something about the arrangement felt deliberate, a pattern, perhaps, though I couldn't name it. I bent down and touched one, cold, dry, fragile. The texture scraped my fingers, and the smell of something old and sharp rose faintly. A rustle from the underbrush made me flinch, but no wind moved the leaves. I moved forward slowly, careful. Every step revealed more bones, tiny pieces forming lines and spirals in the dirt. Some were half buried, some lying flat, and they seemed to stretch farther than the trail should. The forest seemed to grow heavier with each step, shadows pressing along the edges of the path, and the fog thickened, brushing against my arms. I could feel the damp chill crawling along my spine, and my breath came in quiet, shallow bursts. I realized the bones weren't random. They formed sequences, circles, and spirals I couldn't follow all at once. The patterns twisted like they were moving, shifting under my gaze, mocking my attempt to understand. A faint hum rose through the forest. I could hear it in the soles of my boots, in the low vibration of the air around me. Leaves rustled softly, though the wind had died completely. Somewhere close, something shifted, but I couldn't see what. I took another step. A small cluster of bones glinted pale and sharp in the fog. I noticed tiny scratches along their surfaces, as if something or someone had arranged them carefully. The pattern seemed to repeat, but each repetition was slightly different. The forest was alive with it. The smell of damp moss mixed with faint iron. My fingers itched from brushing against fallen sticks, but I couldn't stop touching the trail, couldn't stop following the shapes. It felt necessary, though I didn't understand why. I paused. The trail seemed endless, bones spiraling deeper into the fog. I could hear soft cracks beneath my feet, the faint brushing of fragments shifting, and the hum seemed louder now, like the forest itself was breathing in time with me. I realized I had been walking for longer than I thought. The sun, or what little light filtered through, was pale and distant. The bones stretched onward unbroken, and the patterns became more intricate. I felt a tightness in my chest, a cold dread that settled like mist around my shoulders. A shadow flickered along the edge of the path. I froze, listened to my own heartbeat, to the soft rustle that followed every step I took. I wanted to turn back, but the trail seemed to reach out, pulling me forward with unseen fingers. Each step revealed new arrangements, tiny bones forming shapes I could not name, but shapes that felt familiar. The forest whispered silently, and the fog pressed closer, tangled with the scent of earth and faint decay. I stopped. The bones stretched farther than I could see. The patterns repeated endlessly, and I understood, suddenly, that there would be no end to this trail. No escape from the watching, waiting forest. I breathed slowly, trying to keep calm, but the trail went on, bones endless in the fog, patterns shifting subtly beneath the pale light, relentless, patient, and unyielding. I turned my gaze to the nearest tree. Its bark was cold and rough, and the shadows seemed to lean closer. The forest had a voice, though it did not speak, and the trail of bones whispered silently, guiding me deeper into its waiting. The forest had grown still. Fog curled around the tree trunks, weaving through the underbrush like soft fingers. The air was damp, and the faint scent of moss and wet leaves hung heavy. I came upon the pool quietly, a hollow space in the earth, its surface unnaturally smooth, reflecting the trees with a pale, cold clarity. I stepped closer. The water trembled slightly beneath my gaze, and a chill rose from the ground through my shoes. I leaned forward, expecting to see myself, but the reflection was not mine. A figure stared back, still and quiet, watching from beneath the water's mirror. Its eyes were empty, and its shape shifted subtly, like smoke caught in pale moonlight. I breathed in, slow and careful. The air tasted of wet earth, but the forest felt hollow around me. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the hum of distant water, was swallowed, as though the trees themselves had paused. I reached out, hand trembling, half hoping the pool would ripple and erase the image. But it didn't move. The figure remained, tilting its head in the same unnatural rhythm as I did, mocking the simple echo of my motion. I stepped back. The soil beneath my boots was soft and damp, pressing into my soles. The fog seemed thicker now, curling into the small hollow around the pool, and the scent of moss was sharp and overwhelming. I tried to blink it away. The figure did not. Its eyes, dark and empty, seemed to follow, even when I stepped around the pool's edge. I heard the faintest whisper of water against the stones, though the pool had been still a moment before. I circled it slowly. From the other side, the reflection remained, unblinking, waiting. Something ancient and patient lingered beneath the surface. I could feel its weight pressing through the fog, through the silence. The trees bent slightly with a wind I couldn't feel. A soft shiver ran through the branches. I could see my own shadow behind me. But in the pool, the figure was alone. Not me, not any part of me. Just that shape, suspended in cold clarity, silent and still. I knelt by the edge, touching the water lightly with my fingers. It was colder than air, slippery, almost oily. The reflection wavered, but the figure's eyes remained locked on mine. It did not blink. It did not breathe. It simply waited. I drew back my hand. My skin prickled, and the forest felt heavier, the fog pressing closer to my face. I could hear nothing, only the silent hum of the forest and the soft, terrible awareness that I was not alone. I took a step back. The figure mirrored me still, its head tilting, mocking the motion of my cautious retreat. I wanted to run, but my feet felt rooted to the damp soil, and the fog clung to my ankles like hands. A faint scent of something metallic drifted from the water, and I realized the figure had no body beneath its eyes, only darkness pressed beneath the mirror's glassy surface. A cold dread settled into my chest, sliding down my spine like water trickling over stone. I finally turned away, the pool behind me still perfectly still, the figure still waiting. The forest swallowed all my steps, and the fog carried the weight of its silence. I didn't look back. The memory of those eyes lingered in the fog, and I could feel the shape of them pressing through the mist long after the pool disappeared from view. The fog lay heavy along the trail, curling through the branches, pressing against my skin with damp fingers. The forest was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind seemed hesitant, stalled among the pines. Then I heard it, a voice, soft, almost gentle, calling my name. At first, I thought it was the wind whispering through the leaves, but the sound was too precise, too deliberate, a perfect echo of my own voice. I froze. The damp moss beneath my boots pressed cold against my soles. The fog thickened, wrapping around my shoulders like a weight I could not lift. It called again. My name, soft, coaxing, patient. And yet, beneath the calm, there was something wrong. a tension in the air that made the hairs along my neck prickle. I tried to ignore it, to walk past, but the forest had grown still, holding its breath. The voice changed. The softness cracked, shattering into jagged fragments, brittle and sharp. "My name!" It hissed, trembling with anger now. I could feel it pressing against me. Like the fog itself had teeth, the damp leaves on the ground shifted beneath unseen steps. Every rustle echoed in my chest. I turned slowly, half hoping to see something familiar, but the forest offered nothing. No shape, no shadow, no hint of form. The voice came again, closer this time. Lower, rougher, trembling with frustration. It mimicked the cadence of my own speech, mocking the very way I breathed. I swallowed, the taste of wet earth and moss filling my mouth. I stepped back. The trees pressed inward, their trunks like silent guards. The fog wrapped tighter, and the air vibrated with the pulse of the voice. I tried to respond, to speak, but my words caught in my throat. It only repeated, shifting tone like glass under pressure, from whisper to snarl, from call to threat. I could feel its presence, a weight hovering just beyond the trees, moving with me, shaping the fog around my shoulders. The ground beneath my boots seemed softer, the soil sucking at my steps. It called once more. This time, not a question, but a demand. A sound too human to be the wind, too cruel to be anything alive. My name. It boomed, fractured and yet precise. I closed my eyes, breathing shallow, heart pressing my ears. The damp scent of the forest filled my lungs, and the fog seemed to lean closer, listening. When I opened my eyes, the forest had not changed, but the voice was everywhere, beneath the leaves and the air, twisting around the branches. It no longer whispered. It waited, patient, ready to strike when I faltered. I walked slowly, each step careful, deliberate. The fog seemed to part just enough to let me pass, but the presence pressed against my back, following, breathing my name in echoes I could not escape. Finally, I reached a small clearing. The fog thinned just slightly and the forest exhaled. The voice lingered, softening, but not gone. A warning, a reminder that it knew where I was, what I was, and that it would wait. I left the trail then, the forest swallowing my footsteps, the damp fog brushing my face one last time. The voice faded into a whisper, a shiver through the trees, but I could still feel its presence in the spaces between shadows, in the stillness of the night. It would call again. I knew it, and I would hear it. The trail had narrowed to a thin ribbon of dirt, barely wide enough for one foot in front of the other. The fog curled low, cold against my ankles, the pines pressing in with silent fingers. The air was heavy, like the forest itself was leaning closer, breathing around me. Each step felt measured, cautious, yet impossible to slow enough. I sensed the edge before I saw it. A drop, sudden, like the world had ended. The cliff stretched down into nothing, dark and yawning, and the wind carried a chill that burned through my coat. Behind me, the forest whispered, soft at first, like the rustle of leaves in a gentle breeze. Then louder, voices layered, overlapping, countless murmurs shaping words I almost recognized. One more step, they said. Another step, their tones weaving into the hum of my own heartbeat. I froze. The dirt beneath my boots felt fragile, the thin trail trembling under weight I did not want to bear. The fog shivered along the cliff's edge, and the cold air tugged at my hair, at my sleeves, wrapping me in the hush of the abyss. It was impossible to tell where the forest ended and the voices began. The shadows beneath the trees stretched toward me, leaning, shifting, alive. Every rustle of the wind carried intent. Every snapping twig a reminder. I tried to step back, but the path had disappeared behind me, eaten by roots and darkness. The whispers pressed closer, a tide of soft insistence, shaping my fear into motion. The edge yawned beneath my feet, and the fog swirled, curling into shapes that were almost human, almost eyes watching from the cliffs below. One step, they said. Just one more, just one more. I shivered. The cold fog seeped into my lungs, the damp earth clinging to my boots, my fingers numb against the bark of the last pine beside the trail. Every breath I drew carried the taste of wet moss and distant stone. The voices rose in a chorus, not threatening, not kind, just patient, unfathomably patient. They knew I could not stay. They knew I could not turn back. I stood there, the cliff's dark abyss below, the forest behind, and the whispers pressing, soft and unending, like the world itself was urging me forward. The wind carried their insistence, curling around my chest, my neck, a pull I could not resist. The fog obscured the edge, but I knew it was there, silent, waiting, patient. The earth beneath my boots seemed to sway, the trail narrowing, the cliff rising, and the voices shaping into the echo of my own name. One final step, they said. One last step. I could feel the forest leaning, every shadow pressing, every whisper drawing me forward, toward the edge, toward the silence beyond. I took a breath. Cold air filled my lungs, the damp fog brushing my face like fingers, and for a moment the world held its breath with me. The voices soft and patient, waiting, their insistence lingering in the hum of the trees. I did not move. I could not move. The trail ended. The forest waited, and the cliff stretched down into the endless dark, silent, holding every whisper, every step I had taken, every choice I would not make. The voices faded to hums, to static in the back of my skull, but the memory of their patience remained, curling through me, pressing into my chest, soft and unyielding. The trail was gone. The forest was still, and I was left with the whispers, waiting for the step I could not take.